Welcome back. In this segment, we'll be talking about the Enlightenment and David Hume. The origins of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment developed out of the Renaissance, Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution. So, all of these previous movements had a great deal of influence on what would later become the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinking challenged accepted beliefs. Enlightenment philosophers wanted to use the ideas and reason of the scientific revolution for problems in government and society. So let's look at these two things here, the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Well, the scientific revolution, occurred in around the 17th century. They laid the foundation for what later would be the Enlightenment. Scientific inquiry for the sake of science was one of the key driving forces of the revolution. But at the same time, there was no challenge to the social order during this scientific revolution. At least it wasn't a deliberate challenge to the social order. However, in the Enlightenment, which occurred in the 18th century, its foundation was built on the scientific revolution, and they wanted to reform society based on scientific thinking. And they did challenge authorities. In fact, they seemed to intentionally at times challenge authorities. So let's look at what were some of the defining things of this enlightenment. It begins with rejection, what they didn't want. Well, they rejected dogma, superstition, traditional religion, factionalism, monarchy, and disorder. This was basically the idea that sparked the Enlightenment. Think for yourself. Enlightenment thinkers rejected authority and upheld the freedom of individuals to think for themselves. Such figures as Voltaire, Rousseau, Hume, and Kant were instrumental to this idea of thinking this way. The Enlightenment, the work of such individuals as Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Hobbes, Newton, Bacon, and Descartes, ushered in this period of philosophy known as the Enlightenment. Increasing skepticism concerning religious dogma and the Enlightenment were closely related. As it was stated at one point, there were serious concerns about the historical accuracy of the Bible. Stating this, beliefs are to be accepted only on the basis of reason, not on the authority of priests, sacred texts, or tradition. So, societal perfection was achievable through the application of objective knowledge, and therefore the period was characterized by a great deal of optimism. Enlightenment devalued such things as prejudice and customs which owe their development to historical peculiarities rather than the exercise of reason. What matters in the Enlightenment was not that somebody was from France or from Germany, or they were French or German, but that one is an individual man united in brotherhood with all other men by the rationality one shares with them. Obviously, Enlightenment ideas could only go so far, very man focused. So, the time of Enlightenment came about because of many things that happened before the period of Enlightenment. In the 1600s, they had a different ideology, one steeped in supernatural politics, alchemy, angelology, demonology, and so on. The War of the Roses was going on when a monarch died without a clear heir. So there was a great deal of fighting. So then we see the Renaissance and Reformation, where the Renaissance saw many countries become Protestant, shattering the 1500-year-old spiritual monopoly of Catholicism. Such individuals as Martin Luther, who came to reject several teachings and practices of the Roman Catholic Church. And also we have Henry VIII, that participated in the separation of the Church of England from the Roman Catholic Church, driven to some part because he wanted to have a divorce so he could remarry someone else. So all this is going on. We have the split of the church, we have this factionalism, and then we have religious wars. England, Germany, and Holland became Protestant allies, whereas France, Spain, and Italy were Catholic allies. The war between the Protestants and Catholics went off and on for over a century. The 30 Years' War, the French Wars of Religion, at least until the Protestant groups turned on each other due to infighting. So we see the institution sort of at war, two religious wars going on because you have the Church of Protestants and the Catholic Church. But at the same time, we had the following: churches were also battling against people who had ideas that went against them. Heresy, belief or theory that is strongly at variance with established beliefs or customs. So the church established the Inquisition, a process within the church appointed to combat heresy. We saw this previously with Galileo, who went on the wrong side of an inquisition and then was punished. So we saw this fighting back, and some of the other things that went on too. There were punishments. Descending from standard scriptural interpretations led to public burning, increasing numbers of witch burnings in the mid 1500s. In 1591, King James authorizes the torture of suspected witches in Scotland. The height of the Inquisition activity in Spain and France peaked in the 15 and 1600s. So scientists were treated harshly as well when they went against the teachings and beliefs of the church. As we saw previously, the church arrested Galileo for his heretical ideas. Threatened with torture, he publicly recanted his science and lived his last days under permanent house arrest. Copernicus avoided some of the problems because he had most of his work published at his death, so he was able to avoid a lot of the harsh treatment. But others were burned at the stake and killed in other ways as well. So the Enlightenment had a many factors that led to it, that had an influence on its attitudes, its ways of how it looked at things socially, how it viewed government as well as religion. So, from the perspective of attitude, they had a desire for rationality, logic, and consistency, a rejection of being too emotional, emotionalism, a preference for evidence, not faith, increased interest in science, mathematics, and geometry, an admiration for Greece and Rome, and an abhorrence for all the things medieval where a lot of the superstitious ideas stemmed from. A preference for the artificial over the natural, technology over wilderness. And we'll see these attitudes a little bit later will be flipped. Socially, there was a disdain for messiness and chaos, a preference for democracy, a preference for civilized, polite discussion, a desire to create social standards based on reason, not tradition, an embrace on monotheistic deism rather than the traditional Tritarian doctrines. So, from the perspective of religion, Enlightenment thinkers believed humans were capable of discovering truth for themselves. Many believed in an all powerful deity, or God, but not in a specific church or holy book. Right and wrong should be based on rational insight. When it comes to government, Enlightenment thinkers criticize accepted ideas about government. They question the divine right of kings, the idea that God chose a country's king and that God gave the king authority to rule over their subjects. That is one of the reasons why, oftentimes, when a king or monarch was being crowned, it was a religious figure doing the crowning, a bishop or a pope, because they were basically saying this person is ruling you on behalf of God. Many Enlightenment thinkers stressed individual rights that the governments must respect. Enlightenment thinkers also felt that people should have a say in their government, and this should sound familiar. The United States builds a government based on these Enlightenment principles, the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution. Belief in progress continues in Europe and the United States. The Western imperial and economic power will begin to spread Enlightenment ideas around the world.